everyone, and welcome to, what is this show? Oh, it's SciComm Happy Hour, also known as Psycho Hey-Ho, which I can only say when Kishore is not here because he hates it so much. I am Trace. This is my YouTube channel, so welcome. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. We do this every Friday, and it's just a bunch of nerds. Sometimes we have alcohol, sometimes we just hang out, and apparently today we're wearing Hawaiian shirts and black. We have a very specific theme going on here. So, yeah, I'm Trace. You can find me. There's a thing off here to the side that has my handles on it, but below me is Bobak. Hi, Bobak. Happy Friday.
Hi, I'm Bobak. I'm an engineer. I work at NASA's JPL by day and then do science communication by night, or at least off work hours.
And then over here we have Anna. Over here.
Hi, I'm Anna. I'm also an engineer, a biomedical engineer. I do research at Cornell University. I study microbes, gut microbes, and I'm also a science communicator on the side with whatever little time I have, and a crochet artist.
Nice.
That's cool. And then over here we have Deanna.
I'm right there. Hi guys, I'm Diana ALSINDY. I am a propulsion development engineer at Virgin Orbit. I have studied chemical engineering 3 years ago when I graduated, and now I build rockets and engines. And I love to do science communication bilingually. My native language is Arabic, so I try to provide science to the Middle East.
I'm surrounded by engineers. I didn't even realize.
Crowding you.
No wonder. Okay, well, that's cool. I love it. I am not an engineer. I got a background in behavioral psychology, so I'm on the social sciences side. Although it is a bachelor's of science, it's because it's empirical, but it's not engineering. Although I did try to study chemical engineering for a while, Deanna. That was my first major. Really? But I couldn't pull the calculus off. I had to take it twice, and I barely passed it the second time, and I was like, I should probably not make this my career.
Yeah, engineering has a lot of math. It's like 8 or 9 classes of math, but you can get over it eventually.
Yeah.
But I think people in school fooled you. I haven't used an integral or a derivative or anything calculus related in over 6 years.
What? I could have been an engineer this whole time?
Yeah.
It's a lot of the physics, like go hand in hand, and the rocket equation and all these theory. When it comes to making like complicated math, it's usually you're using the end.
Yeah.
Is that a JPL go back?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like I use math still, but for the most part, it's just to double check like the tools that I build. Mm-hmm. So like it's right just to like do the envelope calculations and be like, yeah, this model that I made looks at least kind of vaguely reflects reality. But yeah, it's been a while since I've actually done an integral.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even know what an integral is anymore.
It's that you know, that little shape where you like
little squiggly.
Yeah.
Like S thing. Like
yeah, like the S thing. Yeah, like the stretched S.
You see, you know something about that.
I feel so dumb now. I feel so dumb. But that's okay. I'll just have to go learn something. This week we always try and do a fundraiser, and this week we're doing the Center for Policing Equity, which I think is important because it will help with the movement to defund police departments, which, by the way, does not mean not having police departments. It means re-looking at every police department's budget and how it is spent and why it is spent in that way, which I think we should be doing with any taxpayer-funded system occasionally. So public safety is anything but safe for some of our Americans and people around the world. So as I like to say, more research is needed. And in order to find out the right way to police, we need to fund the research. So Center for Policing Equity. Any donations? You should see it on YouTube below the video. But this week we wanted to talk about talking about SciComm kind of in multilingualism because we have a bunch of people here who are American SciCommers, but also speak to audiences that are both in the US and elsewhere, which I think is awesome. And I know, Bobak, I'm going to let you kind of take over because this is something that you were really excited to talk about. Like, we wanted to talk about this weeks ago, and when Deanna was like, sure, I'll be on, we were like, oh my God, okay, cool. This is awesome. We can like get people who actually do SciComm in more than one language, which is so awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think I brought this up because I was like, I am struggling with it, right? Like, to be honest with you. So I'm born here in the United States. I do speak a few languages, but I would actually say that the audience that I tend to reach besides an American audience is largely an Iranian audience, and Persian by far is like the weakest of my languages because I only have spoken it with family. And so it's very like conversational. It's very like, I basically think I probably speak around the level of a fifth, you know, like not like a 5 or 6 year old rather. Like I could certainly talk to my grandparents about how my day was or things that I did, but I can't say like, oh, here's an engineering concept. Let me convey that to you in my Persian. And so I've been trying to do better at that, I think, in large part because not just for those audiences, for Iranian audiences who I think don't necessarily have that many folks like myself who, you know, can work in industry and talk about what that experience is like, but also even for an American audience where I think it's important for those of us who come from immigrant or minority backgrounds to sort of be kind of loud and proud and sort of show off that we are contributing and that we are, not that that should justify, you know, anything, but just sort of make the presence be more felt. And so that people can recognize that what makes this country truly great is the contributions of so many different people and backgrounds. So that's kind of where my background was. And so like, I definitely have, you know, tried the mix of like Google Translate and my words, and then like texting my dad and being like, Dad, how would you say this?
Thanks to that.
Yeah. So I imagine everybody kind of has that, but that's kind of why this topic came up, because I'm like, a lot of us are doing bilingual SciComm, and it's kind of it still seems like a relatively niche thing. I definitely see a lot more people doing SciComm, but kind of bilingual or multicultural even, right? SciComm is kind of different. I would love to hear about whether the language or cultural norms also affect how folks communicate ideas, not just the technical words.
I think it's honestly cool that you don't speak the engineering language in Persian, because that could make you a little bit closer to the people that are listening to you.
Sure.
12 years old who probably
that's true.
degree doesn't speak English. If you don't know how to explain it in the regular way of explaining it in English, you'll probably reach that person a little bit more because you'll reach their level of understanding of that specific topic. So in some ways, I view this as a positive thing that you speak Persian and at that level because you could reach more people.
It's almost like the Randall Monroe, like the, you know, describe your work or whatever in the 1,000 most common words.
Right.
That exercise. I mean, I don't do that in English at all. So it's a good point that even just in general practice, it would be smart to think about how wide a net you're able to cast if you use very technical language.
Yeah, and a lot of the words don't translate. I'm sure you can all relate. The concept doesn't translate. There is no word for it. Like in Arabic, there is no word for a rocket, like a scientific rocket. For a rocket in Arabic means missile. So one time I did an interview, and in the interview it said rocket, and when you go to Google Translate that page, it translates missile. So it's like, whoa, like this is So I think it's important for us to be either creating this terminology or that understanding so it can eventually make it to our dictionaries.
That's a great point.
I was gonna say in Japanese, I noticed like a lot of the words are just the English version of a word, right? You know, transliterated. And Persian definitely has some of that, although some of it is definitely from earlier influences. Like you definitely find like French technical vocabulary and German technical vocabulary that isn't necessarily the same as what we use in English.
For me, it's different because I'm a biomedical engineer, but what I do in my SciComm, it's actually related to what I study now, which is microbiology. So it's funny because in microbiology, it's a really old field. So there's a lot of terminology that does exist in Spanish, but biomedical engineering, like literally the departments I've ever been in have not been older than 20 years. So there's a lot of terminology that we have that hasn't been translated to other languages yet. So I feel like I'm really good about now. I didn't used to be. I'm really good now about talking about microbes, but like get me going about tissue engineering or biomaterials, and I'll be like, and sometimes too, it's funny because you like Petri dish. I used to translate it literally until one of my friends was like, Anna, you know that like in actual labs, people don't say that. Like we say Petri box, but in Spanish. And I was like, I sound like an idiot now. Thank you for letting me know. So it's like an experience.
Cool. It's
Yeah.
just we're paying attention, and they don't mean harm. They just want to probably use more accurate terms.
Right.
Actually communicate that. I get corrected all the time. My grammar is so bad. Like Arabic grammar is probably the top 3 most difficult things to learn, because I came to the States when I was 14, so I don't remember how to do grammar. It's very complicated. So my dad always either translates it for me. I go to Google Translate, and you can tell it's Google Translate.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can.
That's really funny. My fiance is Brazilian. She moved here when she was a baby, and so she speaks Portuguese because that's what her parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles all speak, and then she speaks English, and she majored in Spanish, so she can speak all of these different languages. But I was always like, wow, that's so cool. I learned some Spanish, but my heritage is Puerto Rican, but we never spoke it at home. My grandfather spoke it, and he died when I was 11, so we didn't really have another language around the house. But anyway, long story short, we're in Brazil, and the news is on, and I asked her about what was going on, and she's like, I don't know. That's legal Portuguese. That's business Portuguese. I don't speak that. I only speak conversational Portuguese, which I think is a whole, that is like the essence of what we're talking about, right? Like we can all, we can all relate to each other in one way, but then to speak like the correct terminology for a petri dish or a rocket or, you know, whatever is almost like another layer of language.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
That's in English though, like conversational English and the formal English, it's kind of the same. Like I speak to you and I speak to my boss and I speak in conferences the same way, but if I want to read an actual text in Arabic in an Arabic textbook, it's completely different. It's like I use a slang and with my friends, but when I'm actually studying, I'm reading the formal Arabic that's written in like textbook, Quran, Bible, stuff like that. Yeah, I just recently read a story, a children's book story about, you know, planets and space, and I got it completely wrong. I'm reading the text, it's understandable, but there are certain ways of like sounding and where you put your tongue in your mouth that makes it sound differently. I'm sure there's a word for it in English. So I just realized that in English, it doesn't have that.
Huh.
Yeah, there is a, you know, I mean, I not in the science world as much, but like I definitely noticed, you know, Japanese and stuff where there is obviously there's very tiered formality as well in the language. And English is a very common, generally speaking, a common denominator English. Like I don't, like you were saying, like I don't speak to my boss very much differently than I speak to, you know, to you guys, or, I mean, I certainly may choose to not use curse words in various contexts, but yeah, for the most part, like it's kind of interesting. I was gonna ask a question. Going back to one thing I will say about the, you know, the making mistakes in the text or whatever. I found people are, for the like 99% of people are super supportive. Oh, I'm frozen.
You're frozen a little bit, but we can still hear you.
We'll see.
We can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you. You're just very thoughtful for a long time.
I can tell I'm frozen, so I'll just quietly.
I need to take a picture of this. Oh no!
Oh, you're back.
We got.
Is
I
he
don't know if you're frozen again.
He froze again, I think.
Oh. Whoa.
I'm doing that on purpose.
Well, while we wait for Bobak, there is a question in the chat that I thought I would put in. I'm sorry if I can't pronounce your name. It is Zeinab, Zainab. He's a Lebanese 15-year-old and doesn't know where I should begin. What is the first step if I wanted to reach a space agency?
I can respond to that.
Sure.
I am assuming they're from the Middle East, based on their name. The thing you need to do is get any science degree, any technical degree in science. It can be engineer, it can be physics, math, any of these degrees, because it could help you conduct whatever experiment that you want to do. If you want to go to space and conduct this research and these experiments, your technical degree could help. So find your passion. If you're 15, you're probably, is that high school or middle school? Yeah,
high school.
Yeah, so you don't have to pick exactly what you want to study, but if you can take extra classes in science, that would be really helpful in determining what you really like. So when you graduate a few years, you know what to major in college.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I think that would be the same kind of here as well, right? If you want, like, the more the sciences you can get, the better in terms of the younger you are. When I thought I was going to be a chemical engineering major and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, the advisor said to take as much math as you could. So we were on block scheduling my senior year, and I took function statistics and trig and pre-calc and physics all in the same year, and it really helped for stuff like that. So
yeah, and if you can learn software skills, could be anything, could be thermal analysis, fluids analysis, CADing, coding. It's so awesome to learn this at an early age. When I have children, they're going to learn coding at the age of 3. Like, I struggled to learn coding when I was actually a computer science major. I am not anymore because I hated coding. So if I learned it at the age of 3, it would have been so easy. So learn programming and these software skill sets.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things that people underestimate, even in the social sciences, is like being good with computers is a necessity. Like, I got a master's degree in communication and we had to learn SPSS. It's just like, that's just the way it goes. Like,
Yeah.
I remember SPSS. That's a great tool. It works out so well, though.
It's a wonderful tool, but like for a lot of the people that I was in master's programs with who had no technical background in terms of like statistics, I had to take behavioral statistics in undergrad, but like most people had never taken math. They were just like doing communication degrees. So it was really hard for them to kind of adjust, but it's also just like understanding how computers work and why when you click around, they're doing what they're doing. It's valuable.
How can it help you in modeling things and make your life easier when you try to solve the same problem again? I'm sure Bobak and Anna, you experience this with your fields where you use those tools to make your life easier.
Yeah, for sure.
Also that learning curve, though, for sure, the same thing, right? Where it's a huge learning curve, but mastering that is such a big part of the job.
Yeah, totally.
I just learned ANSYS. Guys, I did not know ANSYS before. It's like structural analysis and like modal analysis for frequencies and stuff. It is so exciting that I know how software works and it doesn't break on me like after trying for 36 weeks and straight. So learn ANSYS if you can.
I'm just going to tell people in the chat, it's ANSYS, right?
Yes.
I've never used it. I had to Google it. Didn't know what it was. But yeah, those I had to learn video editor software, and it's like it takes a lot of time to figure that stuff out. It's like even putting on stuff like this, it's important to know how and be able to be. I think all of you engineering types will get like be okay with breaking shit. Like it's okay if you break it, it's fine. You can figure out how to fix it. You can just wipe it and start over. Like there are plenty. There's always a way to try something. And if you're not comfortable playing with it, then that's
one of the great things about modern tools, though, right? Because I think about my parents and like the computers and everything we've grown up with are all like you really can't break the computer. Like you can mess up stuff, but you can't really break it. And my parents come from an era where like you really could mess it up.
Yeah.
And that's like one of the great things about the way the tools are built nowadays. Like, you're going to maybe mess up your analysis, but there's revert copy, undo, all the different tools that just didn't exist. We take for granted, but they didn't exist.
Yeah. I mean,
that's true.
The trial and error that we can learn by that you couldn't learn by with like, well, you could. I've also done like I worked at a historic site, so we would do blacksmithing, and it's like there's a lot of trial and error in learning that. But you end up like I have this piece of steel. This piece of steel is ruined. I need another piece of steel. Like with a computer and with software, that's not really the case all the time.
Did you say blacksmithing?
Blacksmithing. It's like with the anvil and the hammer and the fire, and you heat up the metal and you pound it. And...
Oh, that's very satisfying. I can only.
Oh. It is so satisfying. But
Bobak, I feel like Bobak had a question.
I did before my internet started dying. I was going to ask about experiences. I was relating that my experience so far in the kind of the bilingual SciComm is that people are exceedingly supportive. I mean, there's a couple of people who are like, "You're not authentic." I don't know what that means, but for the like 99% of people are like, hey, oh, you use this word and you meant to use this word, or like, you know, oh, let me help you. I can help you edit that like translation. Or like, I literally have somebody who, you know, who's slid into my DMs and was like, hey, I appreciate what you're doing, and I'd love to help you translate some of these like things if you're, and I was like, this is so nice. Like, you don't have to do this, but I think most people want the content and are more than happy to help, it's a really nice thing. I mean, it's a very, I guess, gentle net, I guess, if you follow is what I'm sort of saying. And I think that's really wonderful.
Yeah, I experienced the same thing. I have a lot of people who want to add, you know, subtitles to my videos, and they can translate it from Arabic to English. Or I had people interested in saying, like, I can, you know, either like write the text for you if you want to give it to me in English, or I can just edit it. And there is a lot of people who want to do science communication and don't know how to get into that. Think that you need to speak English, you need to speak perfect English, you have to be an expert in that field, and that's not the case. The cool thing is, like, we're all regular people, and, you know, I'm doing, you know, this chat with you from my bedroom, and I'm not an expert whatsoever in propulsion or science communication, but it's like a trial and error, and I love it.
Yeah, it's totally a trial and error. So my case is a little bit different because I handle my social media accounts, I think, different from pretty much every other bilingual science communicator. I have 2 separate accounts. I went into this, maybe I can tell you about how I started in and why I have two separate accounts. So I have these guys here. These are my props. So I crochet, I told you, right? And so one day we were going to the USA National Science and Engineering Festival, which if you ever can make it, I recommend you go. It's huge. It's overwhelming. And we were just like brainstorming, right? We're competing with like JPL, NASA, Discovery Channel, and all we have is like our little table from like with microbes. And like, if you know anything about microbes, you actually cannot see them. So like, how do you attract people to a booth with stuff that you cannot see? And so I said, oh, I can crochet some microbes. And everyone I think was like, sure, Anna, sure. But like, can you also make the poster? Because like, I don't know. So like everyone was so skeptical. And then I brought my microbes and they were a hit, and they were a hit at the festival. And moreover than that, like the professors and other grad students that were there, they used them to teach cool things. Like this guy, the way it moves, it's just like a corkscrew, and that's how it moves forward. And so you can teach really fun stuff. And that's when I was like, I should just post one every Monday. And that's why I started, like, if you go to my account, every hashtag Micro Mondays, you'll see a new one, which is why I have like a bazillion. And then, yeah, I make a new one almost every Monday. Not every Monday, but almost close to every Monday. And then, yeah, we can chat later about how much of a good or a bad idea it is to create a weekly hashtag.
Yeah.
I started that, and
but then I remember like a month in, one of my cousins was like, I love what you're doing, but I can never understand it. Like, I don't know what you're saying. And so, because it wasn't in Spanish, you know? And so then I thought about it. I did some research, could only, at the time, it's much better now, like 2 years ago, I could really only find maybe 10 people who are doing science communication in Spanish in social media that had like a reasonably, and by reasonably large following, I mean like 1,000 plus. So I'm not talking about huge people, not like in the English speaking world, like any following almost. And that's when I was like, okay, should I do a simultaneous, like, you know, post it in English, post it in Spanish? And I debated on this for a long time. And then I ended up deciding not to, because I think sometimes when we talk about bilingual communications, we do a disservice to both audiences in doing literal translations. And so like an example of this is, I also science, because this is getting back to what I was saying at the beginning about reconfiguring what people think of as like what a Colombian scientist looks like, or in Colombia, what does a scientist look like? Anyways, I was profiling one of my friends who studies like how to protect roses from this fungus. And so in the US, I used like a Valentine's Day reference, but in Colombia, our Valentine's Day is in September, and it was like February. So that would have made like 0 sense and like it would have been lost in translation. So then what I ended up doing for that was in Colombia, one thing that's very Colombian is like being really proud of being first at anything. So like most biodiverse country, best coffees, right? And it turns out that we're like the #1 exporter of roses. And so then I was like, this is what I'm gonna do. And so I've been really happy with that approach. I mean, the microbe is always the same, but the way I introduce it is different. And the rest of the week, I actually do way different content. And so for me, that was better. And so I'm not really talking about translations very much.
Yeah.
But I have found that everyone is really nice, even when I don't say things that are wrong as often anymore. But when I was starting out, I would sometimes use funny verbs.
Yeah.
That's a great example, though.
I
That's
love that story.
Yeah, that's such a great. I mean, that's such a great case of we're really also being like more culturally aware. Right, yeah. It gives you a different connection to the science than others. That's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I write a show that it's about astronomy, but it airs in the U.S., but it's also available on YouTube. So sometimes people are like, "Oh, well, it's not winter right now where I am, so why are you saying this is a winter constellation?" And so you have to be aware of stuff. It's funny. So D News, when I was there, they took our top 100 episodes. They sent them to somebody who translated them into Spanish. Then they re-recorded them out of the Discovery Miami office as D News en Español. And the D News en Español channel, I always would watch it, and I thought it was so funny because like the references didn't make sense. Because like they literally translated word for word exactly what we had said, and our references were like trying to appeal in like 2013 to like memes of 2013, and like this was done 2 years later, so even that was wrong. But it's like people who are speaking Spanish wouldn't necessarily
get it
about
right? Yeah.
Back to the Future in the same way as somebody who might like, or at least not talk about it in the same way, you know, like. And so it was just so interesting to me, and I was always like, why don't we get somebody to just take the research and rewrite the episode? Like, why would we translate it? Why not just write a new episode that's the same thing? Right. Like, I don't get
especially if you're re-recording, right? Like if you're adding subtitles, that's different, no flexibility. But if you're recording again, if you're already putting in the work, just put in a tiny little bit more work.
Yeah, it was fascinating to me. But you know, the channel, people loved that it existed, because I think exactly what you're saying, that like, especially at the time, like a few years ago, it was really small groups of people that were doing SciComm in like Latin America. And that's, I think, so awesome. I love the idea of like having 2 different like Microbe Mondays, and then you wrote in our rundown Micro Martes, which I think is really funny. I think like that's awesome. Like it's great. You're even understanding the 2 hashtags that exist, which I think people who use Twitter or Insta don't even realize, like don't even think to like, oh well, this is the hashtag for the English speaking world. There might be a completely different hashtag, say, I imagine in Arabic.
Yeah, definitely. And honestly, the social media platforms don't really help when they have 2,000 character limit.
Yes, that was another reason.
Yeah, I mean, right now, I want to explain like something about like rocket engines, combustion chambers. If I want to explain that, you know, in a way where it's valid Instagram audience, I have to cut that in half. I always run over by 1,000 characters. So I was like, this sucks. Like now, it's not gonna reach the audience. So it's like an art to try to cut down in order to fit in, and then you can't hashtags and you can't put emojis, and you have to like find little spaces that you can delete. Twitter is even worse, but yeah, I like that. I have 2 accounts, but I'm sure it's double will work.
I think it's more than double. So like if I were to go back in time, I'm not sure that I would have one in English. Like I would stay in English on Twitter, which is my more professional. By professional, I mean more like academic facing account. And then honestly, for Instagram, just for my sanity, I would probably just do the one in Spanish. It's just that now, like, I feel bad abandoning people that have been with me since the beginning. So I stick with it. But yeah, it is a lot more work.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. I love it.
Yeah, I do agree. It's probably more work than you might want, especially like 2 accounts. It's amazing how much more work having 2 different things going can really be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have a writer's block. Sometimes you're not inspired.
Yeah.
Things going on in the world that you do not want to be posting about science. I mean, this happened to us last week. It's happening to me. Like, I haven't posted in a month, and I don't think I want to, because there's other things that we need to be highlighting.
Yeah.
I've been noticing that ever since I started science communication. It's really not just about science and your topic and mission. What's going on too.
Yeah. We skipped the SciComm happy hour for a few weeks to just kind of let people breathe and let people, get the word out about Black Lives Matter, to get the word out about what was going on in policing in the US. So we inched back in because we heard from people that they wanted a distraction, kind of. They wanted a little bit of like a change in pace. So we have talked about, stuff like that. And obviously, again, donations are going to the Center for Policing Equity, but it's like, I agree with you. I think SciComm, it's funny how much Emily Calandrelli and I have talked about this before, where she does a lot of space stuff, and then occasionally we'll do something political and people will say like, oh, stick to science. And it's like, okay, why? Like, science is funded by the government. Science is like, NASA is a government organization. Like, the most science that we think of is a government funded science. Like, the government scientists are real. So like, science is political in that respect. But also, like, you don't tell musicians to stick to music, and you don't tell actors to stick to acting and shut up. Like, does that mean
people do? To be very clear, I think people do say that to them.
That's
but
true.
Yeah.
But what's the difference with me saying like, stick to, I don't know, being a business person? Like, every person is not a politician. There are only so many politicians. So like, no one can talk about politics unless you work in it. That doesn't make sense.
But I think the type of following really matters when it comes to the subject. For example, in my following from the Middle East, they do want me to talk about politics. They do want me to talk about what's happening in Iraq and the protests that happened in October, which are probably still happening. They do want me to bring and shed light to the rest of the world on the inhumane things that are happening in our country. And honestly, this is also ironic. I changed my opinion through time. At the beginning, I was like, no, I am not going to talk about that. This is a science page. I am not an expert in any other things. But do you really need to be an expert to talk about human rights? Because education is basically a human right. Somebody who's 12-year-old who is studying calculus from their house in the middle of a war zone and tells me that your page is really making a difference for me. I do want to continue to talk about science, but I want to talk about how can I make that 12-year-old life better so they can actually study the science in their life. Who knows what are they going to do? So ever since, I kind of changed my opinion. Like, no, the Arabian Stargazer is not just about Arabians stargazing. Like, it is more about Arabians and their life, and how can we use our voices, our platform, to just raise them up and make their life better.
That's right.
Yeah, I love, Diana, I love what you said. I also took a break because I was like, I feel like I just need to listen and reflect and take a page from other people. And then I decided, I don't know who I heard that from, but it was another SciCommer. I just can't remember who it was. And it was about like, think about things that are within your lane, but that intersect with this topic. And so this guy that I just showed you is like the microbe that causes syphilis. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the syphilis Tuskegee experiment, where like men were recruited into this experiment and people didn't know, like they didn't know that they were part of an experiment. They were never told they had syphilis. Even after penicillin became the treatment of choice, they were kept on the study without a treatment for like 20 extra years. It's like this awful example of racism and discrimination in science. Other really frustrating fun fact, the same person who led this study is the same person who also went to Guatemala and on purpose infected prisoners and prostitutes with syphilis to keep studying this disease. So I was like, okay, this actually, it's a microbe and it's a story about microbes. So then I used it to have a Microbe Monday story. And then I actually kind of challenged myself, right? Like, I've kind of shied away from like talking about these stories because I personally, one of my missions is to show people that we shouldn't be scared of microbes, that they're good for you. But we cannot deny that there's some past there in science. There are some things that we need to revisit. And so now my I hope to do like a lot more of these, maybe not every time, but keep bringing it up so that we're aware of it, so that we can tell that like these issues also exist in science.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anna, since you're chatting about this, I wanted to bring up the paper that you were part of recently. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
It was published on May 22nd, I think, if I remember correctly.
That's recent.
It's super recent.
It's very recent.
And so the paper's title is Science Communication in Multiple Languages is Critical to Its Effectiveness. I hear that. Love it. So can you tell us a little bit about your findings? Like, why is it critical to effectiveness? And kind of what did y'all learn? You and Melissa Marquez.
So this is Melissa Marquez, and this is also a thing I want to say kind of on the side, kind of like how I met you, Trace. I think that social media is really powerful in connecting people, and especially there aren't very many of us who are bilingual communicators. So I met Melissa, and I literally, like, Melissa has been in the Discovery Channel in Shark Week, so I knew who she was. I'm pretty sure she had no idea who I was. And I just direct messaged her, and I was like, I have this idea for a paper about like the importance of multilingual science communication. Do you want to work with me on this? And she said yes. And so then we started exploring. So we learned things like the top 50 more respected journals in the world, for example, are in English. If you want to do a fun / kind of depressing experiment, you can Google the word science in different languages, and you'll see the graph in our paper, and you'll see that in English, it's like 10 times more than in any other language, including Chinese, including even German or Russian, which are countries that have a very strong history of scientific production, including Japanese, for example. So those are just some of the ways in which it shows that English became the dominant language of science approximately since the 70s. And then that has different types of consequences. So it has consequences like we've talked about for who has access to like the top science in the world. So usually it means you have to speak English. And then we even cite a paper. This is a study that was done in my home country in Colombia, where they discovered that for scientists in Colombia, it might have been biology specifically, I can't remember, that a high level of English proficiency was correlated with a high socioeconomic background. So you can see that creates barriers, and not even just that, but also on the other side, right? So also for the public. And so then that also means that if everything is published in English, and say that a journalist doesn't have access to that, then it can communicate those findings to people. It creates pressures for scientists who are even in Colombia, in Iraq, in Iran, in other parts of the world to publish in English and not in their home languages. So that means that oftentimes, even when you're writing about stuff that's pertinent to your country, like the audience you're trying to help can't even read your paper. Or the journalists don't even cover that story. Like I know in Colombia, we rely a lot on translations of the Associated Press reports, right? But like the AP is not going to cover Colombian science. I mean, it might if there's like a big discovery, but not on a daily basis, right? And so we're seeing it. I think it's really timely right now because we're seeing it with the coronavirus. Like right now, to fight the coronavirus, we need literally the whole world to be scientifically literate. And the problem is that we don't even have the resources to make the whole world scientifically literate. And as long as some communities continue to be literate about the coronavirus, then like the virus is not going to go away because it's going to keep traveling around the world. So we broke this way before the coronavirus pandemic. So it was very funny that it came out when it did, like in the middle of the pandemic, when a lot of other people like Monica Feliu, and like she had an episode on Shortwave, the podcast, where she talked about her efforts in communicating about the coronavirus in Spanish in Puerto Rico. So it just all happened kind of at the same time. And then like, I don't want to take up too much time. We've already talked about some of these. We end the paper by giving different suggestions as to what everyone can do, from like individual scientists to journalists to institutions. So there's like a little bit of, I think there's like a nugget of wisdom for everyone, as well as a lot of examples. Though many of the examples are in Spanish because both Melissa and I are Spanish speakers, but we tried to diversify it.
That's super cool.
Your paper right before we start, and I found it fascinating because a few months ago I posted on my Instagram of the most famous scientific journals Arabic. So if you're a scientist or a researcher or want to conduct a research, you can use these journals and post your research. And the feedback I got on that was fascinating. It basically said what you said, that I am a scientist. Sure, I'll post my science or discoveries in that scientific journal, but it's not going to go anywhere unless I English scientific journal that are well known internationally. I will not be going far and wide with found. And that sucks. I mean, if you don't speak English, then you are excluded immediately. So when we say we want to open science for everyone, we should really be doing it in multiple languages, because we should not pretend like English is the only spoken language. So definitely agree. It's true.
I was treating about diversity specifically in the aerospace industry, but it's a really good point, because I think a lot of people, don't recognize that that's actually for the benefit of the community as well. A lot of people are like, well, why should we? And I'm like, if you have science that is, newsworthy or is groundbreaking, why would I want to keep it in an obscure corner of the world where it doesn't have access to everybody, right? And so the whole point is not to force some sort of thing where we're like, oh, let's all, hold hands, but it's very much for the benefit of industries, of science and everything else. You want more people to have, a platform for sharing this kind of information, right? And that's where I think I try to phrase it in both ways, because I think obviously there's a lot of people who care about making, the world better, but also you can think of it selfishly. If that's what it takes for you to get on the same page and just be like, oh, it means better science for me, great. Then accept it for that reason. You know what I mean? I know I'm preaching to the choir with I know everybody here, but really just in terms of that's a lot of I keep trying to also phrase things in the way that people who maybe don't recognize what they get out of that situation can also hopefully understand. And then that, for me, obviously I'm very passionate about my own field. I want to see it succeed, but I try to also couch things in those terms. It's a great example though, right? If you are a cutting edge scientist, but you're not speaking English, that means the rest of the world is somehow missing out on your research.
Your awesome science, right?
That's right. Yeah.
One time I read a quote. It said, what if we think of if the cure of cancer is in the brain of somebody who doesn't have access for education?
Yeah.
That just struck me. It's like that probably does exist. There's so many diseases that we don't know.
It's almost certainly true. Yeah. I mean, you think about how much of the world doesn't. I mean, we're so fortunate, obviously, in the United States, but interacting particularly with the largely Iranian community, there's so many kids, young people who are so want to get into aerospace or so want to go into sciences and cannot, they're like, how do I do this? And I'm like, I don't have a simple answer for you. It's going to be 5 times, 10 times as much work for you as it was for me to get to the same place that I got to. If it is possible, right? And it's so sad because it's not for lack of desire, right? These are motivated, smart kids who really want to do something, and just for being, born somewhere, it's just that much harder, right? And that's the thing that I want is again, I want, I think all of us want the world to be better. We just want everybody to benefit from it, right? We want and again, selfishly, we all benefit more the more people who can contribute, right? Who can solve those questions about disease or solve complex technical issues that we have. All those things are stuff that we can all, at the end of the day, get good stuff out of. But yeah, it's a tough. I think that's one of the tougher parts, and I think that's also why I even though it's not easy for me, I try to spend the time to communicate. I really do want to sort of at least keep them interested. Do what I can to. Hopefully mentor some kids, but it's obviously, it's a difficult situation.
Yeah.
We got about 10 minutes left, and so I have some questions from the chat that I want to throw out there. Cirillo asked 2, which I thought were both really good. The most recent one is, can you publish in 2 languages? Can you publish papers in 2 languages? I assume not. I mean, the journal probably expects you to publish in English if it's an English-speaking journal, in German if it's a German journal. But can you expand on that, maybe Anna, since you were the most
this is a great question, and yeah, it's a great question. It's something we looked into a lot before we wrote this paper. So in many cases, the abstract, so the summary of the paper, is usually translated to English, no matter where you publish. And then, yeah, it's this weird issue of like copyright and who owns the paper, and it's usually the journal. The good news is that some of big journal, well, not the huge journals, but some kind of more specialized journals are starting to get on board with, like, if you want to publish a translation, they'll let you on their website. That's few. Good. It's not a lot. I do wish journals would take this pressure off the people, right? So off of all of us, right? And instead that they would pay a translator, or, but I mean, they don't even pay reviewers. So who are we kidding? Yes. Or maybe, you know, technology could help. Like Google Translate now is great for conversational stuff. Maybe if we invested a little in making it better at translating science, that could also be a solution that people are talking about.
Yeah. And then Cirillo also asked, do we translate academic papers to match audiences level, and how much should we simplify? And actually, I did a talk about this when I visited CERN last year, I think, early last year. And there's the Flesch Hillard reading score or whatever that you can get at like Microsoft Word, and you do your grammar check, and it's like, your reading score is 12, which is like a 12th grader or whatever. And they did a study with abstracts for scientific papers. Any guess what the reading level of a scientific paper is? Like, or at least
something low.
Yeah, it was beyond college year. It was like beyond like post-college. It was something so high that like almost nobody could read actual like abstracts. And that's a problem. So it's really hard. Because scientists who are, you know, add a bunch of prefixes onto an ology, they're only writing for the other 7 people who have those prefixes. They're not writing for the audience. And that's where science communication comes in. Like, that is where science communicators have the most value. And especially if it's somebody who's like in the field, like the 3 of you are, you know, who are working in these fields, and then you walk out the door and you tell other people about it. You know, that is so powerful, and that's something that not all scientists can do. Some don't even want to do it. So I thought that was a really good question from Cirillo. So thanks for that. We've also got a couple questions for Diana about how to get into, you know, aerospace engineering coming from the Middle East. And one person from Iraq is an aeronautical engineering student and wanted to ask about kind of space economy, since people are stuck at home. If there are any tips you have of people who are all trapped inside.
Well, for the first question, if you do want to be part of the aerospace industry and you happen to be in the Middle East, actually the Arab countries are opening up more opportunities for people who are interested in science. UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan. There's so many like really good agencies now that are starting. And you don't have to really focus on government space agencies. There are startups everywhere. I mean, I work with a startup, and it's a private company. It's not related to you know, government business. So if there are companies who are doing engineering, even if it's not specifically in space, get your foot in the door, because we use the same engineering. We use the same skill sets and softwares and knowledge. So your foot in the door, and slowly, when the world happens to be opening more space opportunities and more space companies, then you can be part of that. So and get a technical degree. You should not, I mean, if you're excited about photography and you want to be an astronaut and a photographer, there is a field for that. But if you want to be a scientist, find something that you're passionate about in science. I happen to want to be a photographer in space before. So job.
That's great.
Space economy? What is that? I don't even know what space economy is.
Yeah, it says about space's production and economy these days. It's from Zainab again.
Oh, I see. Well, if you're stuck at home like me, I have been trying to learn more software skills. I want to actually take a class into space policy. I think it's very fascinating. Space policy was like until 4 years ago when I went to DC. And so many people are studying how can you make space happen, but you have all these laws that are, you know, standing in front of you. So if they are on classes, I have in my Instagram account, the Arabian Stargazer, there's a little highlight that says, like e-learning and like home learning. Press on that, and there are so many resources that I posted that are free online for everybody. LinkedIn Learning, Khan Academy, you can learn either like technical science, like physics and science and stuff like that, or you can do stuff with your kids at home. So I definitely recommend you checking that out.
Awesome. We've got a few minutes left. I do want to just take I wrote a lot in our rundown, and I'm not going to read it all in case you guys checked it out. But today is Juneteenth in the U.S. was the day that is celebrated by many Black Americans as the end of slavery in the United States. It was not actually the end of slavery in the same way. It's a nebulous concept, ending something that's been an institution for a long time. But Juneteenth was of June 19th of 1865 was when General Gordon Granger arrived in Texas, in Galveston, and read a proclamation that essentially said all of the 250,000 enslaved people of Texas were free. He did that with 2,000 Union troops with him, because Texas knew the Emancipation Proclamation had been signed in 1863, two years before, but there are competing narratives as to why Texas did not emancipate the people of Texas, this 250,000 Texas citizens. And so really awesome story on the Washington Post, where Trevor Plant, who's a researcher at the National Archives, found the original order written on June 19th, 1865, in like handwritten order, stamped by the War Department, and it's still legible. Really, really cool. So
wow.
Highly recommend people can go look that up. But Juneteenth is a really important day. I think Americans are hopefully in the future, definitely this year, people are hearing about it, and hopefully they keep hearing about it. It's a powerful day for Black Americans, and I argue a powerful day for all Americans, because it's recognizing that there is a big portion of our population that didn't immigrate from the old country, but were brought here. They didn't immigrate at all, in fact, and were brought here as property, and then now are citizens that we need to recognize as such. So according to Juneteenth.com, Juneteenth festivities include rodeos, fishing, barbecue, and baseball. Juneteenth almost always is focused on education and self-improvement, on guest speakers telling stories of our past, and prayer services, food, community, and celebration. And so I think that's something
awesome.
That all Americans, all people can really identify with, is saying, like, let's look at our past and see what we can be better about in the future. So happy Juneteenth to everybody.
It's so exciting. Made it a paid holiday, so I was off today.
Yeah. Twitter did as well, and a number of other big companies have started to like recognize it as a holiday, which I think is really important.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, Cornell did as well, and but not as like go to the pool, have a holiday, but like as encouraging us to take the time to reflect and stuff. One of the things I did today was rewatch an episode of Blackish. It's from season 4, and it's called Juneteenth. That's where I personally first heard about it 3 years ago. Which is crazy, because I went to undergrad in Texas, and you just heard Texas plays an important part in this story, and I had never heard about it before. So anyways, just a recommendation in case you haven't heard about it before.
Yeah, there are lots of resources, and I can't echo that enough. Like, this is a great day for, like, sure, crack open a beer if you want, but also remember that you're cracking open that beer, and that you should learn about what the holiday actually means, and why it's important to millions and millions of people. So that's pretty awesome. Yeah. With the last couple minutes we have, I thought everybody, if you could tell people where they can find you. We've got some handles up over here, but especially since like Anna, yours are in multiple languages. I only put one handle. I only have room for one handle. So you can tell people where to go find you. So Anna, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook as Ana Porras in English. So that's my name. And then on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok as Ana Aerobias.
Nice. How's that TikTok game going?
Slow.
So definitely go find her on TikTok.
So I started and like I did a bunch of videos that are really cool, and then all of this Black Lives Matter stuff started happening, and then I was like, yeah, it definitely feels like not the network where I should be making fun videos. So then I kind of stopped, but I need to pick it back up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what about you, Diana?
You can find me on the Arabian Stargazer on Instagram. The Arabian Stargazer handle was taken on Twitter, so you can find me on the Arabian Star or Diana ALSINDY. I tweet and Diana ALSINDY the most. So I'm on Facebook, but not active. So the best way to reach me is Instagram or my email, thearabianstargazer@gmail.com.
Sweet. And then down below me is Bobak, and he's here all the time. So
I'm here all
Bobak,
the
what are you gonna plug this week?
I got nothing. Oh, actually, I was reading about Benjamin Banneker, who was the first Black astronomer here in the United States. This predates slavery, so he was a freeman in the North. But that was what I spent my morning reading about. That was fascinating. So if you want to look up Benjamin Banneker, it's a really interesting story about how he got into astronomy. I recommend it. Yeah, that'll be my plug.
Super cool.
Cool.
And then you're here on my channel. If you didn't know that already, you can subscribe. There's also, I just finished a series about leaving Earth and talked to Ariel Waldman and Dr. Pascal Lee about, kind of ways that we can get off the planet if it's possible, where we could live. And if we ever wanted to go to an exoplanet, maybe we should just listen to Michio Kaku and download our brain and beam it to another star. No big deal. So you can go and watch those episodes here. But thanks, everybody. Happy
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.